Good morning. On behalf of the Austin Economic Development Corporation, I want to welcome you to this session with our friends from the Austin Housing Finance Corporation. We are here today with Mandy DeMaio, Director of the Austin Housing Finance Corporation, and Josh Woodrow. Mandy is going to tell us who the Austin Housing Finance Corporation is. Josh is going to walk us through some programs, website, timeline, and then Jose Lopez from our team will wrap us up and tell you some pertinent information. I do want to point out on this slide, this website you see in the bottom, there's a lot more information for you to peruse at your leisure. And this video will be available to all developers afterwards and everyone on our registration list. And I also want to thank Austin Housing Finance Corporation for the pre-development dollars for this project for Block 16 and 18. So when the Austin Economic Development Corporation was created and Block 16 and 18 became one of our projects, our pre-development funds came from Austin Housing Finance Corporation. So we wanted to have this session today to dig in a little deeper about who the Austin Housing Finance Corporation is and how these tools can be used for our project, but for you to get to know Austin Housing Finance Corporation. So with that, I'm going to introduce Mandy DeMaio, who's been with the city of Austin for 6 years. Prior to that, she was with Housing Works and has done a lot of different housing work around town. We're very lucky to have her at AHFC. So with that, Mandy, I will turn it over to you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Teresa, for that kind introduction. And thank you all for being here this morning to talk about Block 16 and 18. These parcels are extraordinarily important to the city and the community. And we are very excited to have so much interest in the solicitation for Block 16 and 18. I wanted to just take a couple of minutes to talk about Austin Housing Finance Corporation. We are a public nonprofit organization, and we're actually a subsidiary of the city of Austin. All of us in the housing department, or most of us, play a role in Austin Housing Finance Corporation, but we are not separate employees. We are actually employees of the city of Austin. AHFC, as it is known, is organized under Chapter 394 of the Texas Local Government Code. It provides a mechanism for the city of Austin to create a housing finance corporation that provides financing for affordable housing and helps create housing opportunities, both for sale and for rent opportunities for low and moderate income people in the city of Austin. So we essentially function as a bank. We provide loans to nonprofit and for-profit developers of affordable housing. We also enter into partnerships with nonprofit and for-profit developers of affordable housing, where we act as the general partner. And as such, we provide certain property tax exemption relief, which helps to drive down the cost of the housing in turn. We also we have a service agreement with the city of Austin. This year's FY24 service agreement is in excess of $100 million. All of our affordable housing programs run through that service agreement. So that includes things like our home repair programs, our down payment assistance programs, and then our housing development assistance programs, which Josh Woodrow is going to talk about just now. He oversees, Josh, we're very fortunate to have him. He oversees, as our community development manager, our housing development assistance programs, which include both subsidy programs and incentive programs. I will hand it over to Josh to dig into the details. And again, thank you so much for having us.
Good, yeah. Well, thank you, Mandy. And let's see, what I can walk through today is how the housing development assistance team can help make these projects happen. So if you can go to the next slide, please. Just a little bit of an overview of some of the things we're going to cover today. I'm going to some development incentives first, how we can help with federal funding, and then we're going to spend most time talking about, if you have a gap in this project, how we're going to do gap financing. So for development incentives, next slide, please. we have a variety of different development incentives. Some of them are density bonus programs where we actually give more entitlements. But based on where this site is located, the primary development incentive that is going to be available for blocks 16 and 18 are smart housing fee waivers. SMART is an acronym meaning safe, mixed income, accessible, reasonably priced, and transit oriented. And this is a program that is designed to stimulate the production of housing for low and moderate income residents. So Austin does have higher development fees than other parts of Texas. And what we're trying to do in all of these programs is to just continue to decrease the cost of constructing income restricted housing. So if your program meets the affordability levels, accessibility, and green building standards, and has a proximity to transit, which blocks 16 and 18 are both very likely to have, you can get fee waivers for development permits, which is just one of our tools at decreasing the overall costs and getting as much housing units built in the city of Austin as possible. Next slide, please. So federal funding. All of these projects do have some large costs. And how do we make this happen? And some of the tools we use, and I see some questions in the chat too, the point of contact for smart housing. What we can do is I'm going to give access to some of our web pages at the very end. And those web pages at the very end are going to have contact info. So that will all be at the end page, person to contact, how to apply, guidelines, all those things like that. So for private activity bonds, these are issued, as Mandy talked about, through AHFC, the Austin Housing Finance Corporation. And they're basically debt. It is a tool to help finance multifamily developments. It's going to cover at least 50% of your construction costs. And we are the issuer of these bonds. And every year we receive applications in August that then goes into a lottery. And depending on your lottery number, it generally means will you get funding in that year or another year. But this is a primary tool. So what we're trying to do is we're trying to help the construction of affordable housing and get our gap to be as little as possible to then help get it across the finish line. So private activity bonds is a primary tool. We have all the guidelines information on the website, but it's good to know when to apply, and that would be in August. Next slide, please. So the other way that we use federal funding is through TDHCA, the Texas Department of Housing and Community Affairs, which are through low-income housing tax credits. These are federal tax credits to offset tax liability at either 4 to 9% in exchange for building low-income rental housing. There are two different types of these. One is the 9% application. Those are due in December, and those are competitive. We usually get maybe 2 to 3 every year in Austin, and it is going to be equity, and it is going to cover 70% of your total project cost. So they're an excellent tool. You generally would just have the low-income housing tax credit, the 70%, whereas if you're doing a 4% tax credit, that would be around 30% of your total project cost. And you would only have access to these 4% low-income housing tax credits if you did a private activity bond. So what you see in this funding here is we're really trying to help get developments access to a lot of debt and equity so that they're coming to us and they're coming to other funding sources, having maybe 70 to 80% of their project already, of that funding stack already covered. Next slide, please. So that brings us to gap financing. As I mentioned, you're coming to us, it would already be covered, and you're thinking, how do I get this last maybe 20, 15% of the capital stack across the finish line? So we have what our program is called Housing Development Assistance, RHODA and ODA. That is rental housing and ownership housing. It is the last component in a funding stack. You would need to have site control, and if you won the RFP, you would. It is going to only fund units at the 50% for rental and 80% for ownership. There's no penalty for mixed income and market rate units. We actually like to see more of a mixture on there. It often makes the project feasible. And there are 3 ways that our money can be used. Either an acquisition, which wouldn't be an issue in this, because this is already city-owned land. Pre-development costs, there's a limit to that, but pre-development costs, the preferred use is going to be construction, just because there's less risk. But all of these are ways of how do we get this project across the finish line. And I'll go into this more in just a second, but we are incredibly blessed to have a lot of different funding sources. So general obligation bonds through the 2022 Housing Bond, Project Connect, Housing Trust Fund, federal funding, and there's also some other geographically specific funding sources as well. Next slide, please. So this is a competitive process where we are looking at how all of these projects compare against each other. There are some quantitative scoring that are based on things from the Affordable Housing Blueprint. And then there's also some qualitative scoring as well, where members of the public will look at this and give some qualitative feedback. So scoring is based primarily on what is mentioned here. Location. Both of these sites already have excellent location close to downtown. How are these schools nearby? Is it close to transit opportunity areas? Things like that. And then also, 2, affordability levels. We really like seeing some of these deeper affordability levels. So if you can get to those 30% rental or maybe 60% for ownership units. We also like seeing larger units and also multi-bedroom units for families. Those are often harder to get, so that is a bonus as well. Population served. COC stands for Continuum of Care Units, which are a type of permanent supportive housing for people experiencing homelessness and coming out of homelessness. So if you can get more of those type of units or units that can serve families, additional accessibility above what is just the minimum. And then also subsidy metrics. We're trying to take these tax dollars and really stretch them as far as we can. So the lower the subsidy per unit or per square foot is going to be something that is going to be compared against other projects as well. And overall, just a lower subsidy for total development costs. So it can be a great project, but if we're funding 50% of it, it is not going to be as competitive as other projects that maybe have just a 20% or a 15% of the overall development cost. Next slide, please. And looking at this as well, for ROTA and OTA, they have some different requirements. For rental, it is going to be 50% and below it is what we're funding. It is also going to be a 40-year affordability period. And for funding terms, it is always going to be below market interest rate, so generally between 1 or 2%, but it is a repayable loan. So it is much lower than market interest rate, but we are expecting this to be repaid at some point to make sure that this is an evergreen funding source that we can use for other developments. And interest is paid as a percentage of cash flow. Now for the OTA units, 80% median family income as well, or below. There's a 99-year affordability period. Now for the ownership units, it is a 0 interest rate and a forgivable loan, just because of the structure and the owner is then a community member as opposed to the developer. And yeah, there's so it is the developer process is done out of excess funds. Let's see, next slide, please. And the quarterly review process and timeline, one of the things that I really want to stress on this as well is that we have 4 times in the year that you can apply for funding. The next one is in November, so it's generally November, February, May, and August. And how this process works is we really want to make sure that all of these projects are looked at, that this is an open and transparent process. So we will receive an application, It will be looked at by our staff panel. We will give some feedback. It will then go to the Housing and Investment Review Committee, which are community members. They will then give feedback. The developer then will also be a part of that one and also answer questions as well. It will then go to our executive team in the housing department to then pass it along to the AHFC board, which it is also the same members of city council, but it is just set up in a different structure there. So this happens 4 times a year. We are now working on sending current applications to the executive team, and then it will go to the AHFC board. So it's a 120-day award timeline. After it is then awarded by council, then we work on closing the loan. Next slide, please. So here's an example. This is what we do for every project in the Housing Investment Review Committee meeting. So we'll show project highlights on here, where it's located. And then as you can see on the bottom, we're really trying to get as much out of the project as possible. So we're going to be comparing them against each other. What is the award amount? What is the percentage of the total project cost? Some of the numbers we look at a lot here is what is the subsidy per affordable unit? If it's something around 100,000 versus 200,000, and then we look a lot also at subsidy per square foot and application score. So these are all going to be compared against each other, but it's really important that for a competitive application that all of these are something that is going to compete against other projects. Next slide, please. So as I mentioned before, we are incredibly lucky at the city of Austin and AHFC to have access to really a historic amount of funding. We have geographically restricted examples of funding, which these won't be as important for y'all, other than there is an East Austin TERS, which is something that these would qualify for. But there are other density bonus programs that will have a fee in lieu component, like Plaza Saltillo. So you would have to be in Plaza Saltillo or in the North Burnett Gateway. But there are some advantages to this site of getting access to funding sources that other areas aren't available or don't have access to. And then we have, so every year for the next 5 years, I believe, we will be getting our general obligation bonds. 30 million of that will go to ROTA, and 15 million of that will go to OTA. Those are interchangeable, but those are some of the easier funding sources for us to use, just because they can be used anywhere. But so overall, in this year, we have some federal funding sources, and this is current too. So some of these will be filled back up again. Housing Trust Fund, we have about 1.2 million. So it is a limited amount of funding, and this is why we have a competitive process. But I was hoping this would be helpful for y'all to understand kind of the access to funding that these projects would have. And as I mentioned, there's an East Austin TERS that's helpful. So always happy to answer questions on kind of what type of funding is available, but this is kind of a common type of for access to funding for a given year. Next slide, please. So earlier I saw some questions on here about the website and how do you get access to all this stuff. This is our housing department website. If you're ever interested, and I will give specific links as well, there are developer and nonprofit resources. This is a great way to go to really dive into those federal funding sources that we mentioned, gap financing, and also some of these developer incentives too. Next slide, please. So these are 2 website links that are going to probably be the most helpful. I think, as I mentioned before, on the federal funding and gap financing, you will find all of the guidelines on there, which are really helpful. You'll find all the information on private activity bonds, contact information about who to ask questions on that as well, low-income housing tax credit. That is all there on the funding page. And then if you're looking for information on smart housing, That is going to be available. I actually think both of these are the same one. I'll make sure that we have access. Both of these are actually the same one here, but there is another one that is an incentive one that we'll make sure to share as well. That will give you access to the two different ones. Next slide, please. And as I mentioned, this is an important piece. There are 4 times of the year to apply for funding. The next funding round is going to be November 3rd, 2023. And if you're applying for private activity bonds, this Q2 is when we generally want people to apply. And if you have a 9% tax credit, we want people to apply in Q4. But just so y'all know, this is the overall timeline here. So if you get the award when you would be applying for private activity bonds, which would be in August, you would then be applying for tax credits, the 4% tax credits, and you would want to make sure you line up with the Q2 application cycle. If you were applying for the low-income housing tax credits, you would want to make sure you apply in for the tax credits in December, and then you would be coming around and applying for gap financing in May. So hope this is helpful. We'll make sure to add some of those links as well on there to our website, that we have both of those on there, funding and incentives, which are both crucial at understanding this. And yeah, that is all we have for today. On the website, there's lots of contact info if you have any other questions, but hope that's helpful. I want to thank all of y'all for your interests in these projects. The Housing Department office is in the middle of these, so we're just excited to see these projects happen. They're incredibly important to the community. But thank you all for having me.
I'll say you're on mute. Thank you, Josh.
Of course.
There you go. Thank you, Teresa. Thank you so much, Josh. A lot of valuable information and insight onto what developers can utilize for these very important projects in the community. And as Josh mentioned, we will be providing a lot of these websites and links as well on our main project website for the RFP. So be on the lookout for those, and I will be providing at the end of the slideshow the link to the website. And we'll also be making sure this video is posted shortly after. For those of you who maybe joined a bit late, we'll have that information out there for you. And then for those of you joining us for the first time, I will mention that this is a series of videos that we have produced with the goal of getting the development community as well as potential occupants better insight into what the RFP process is. And just to go over that for those of you just joining us now, it is a 2-phase process. So really right now we are in phase 1. We released our RFP in August 22nd. And it'll be concluding November 8th. But really the focus of the phase 1 is the development team. So really looking at that core team within the submitting group and really focusing on their vision and approach. Later on in phase 2, we'll be more so focused on the specifics, such as financials. But again, this phase is getting the vision to align with the goals of the project. And again, I'll mention a few of those videos that we have produced so far go into greater depth and detail on what we are looking for, as well as the RFP itself, delineating all the requirements of the RFP. So please check those out on our website. And then our timeline, more detailed here. The next milestone we're approaching is on October 13th will be the deadline for questions. Again, all questions, you are all welcome to email directly to me, and I'll provide that email here at the end. And then they will be posted. Give us about a week to get all those questions compiled and have those posted by the 20th. And as I mentioned earlier, we will be concluding the phase 1 proposal on November 8th. That'll be the deadline to submit. So a big reminder, if you are wishing to submit, you must be registered for the RFP. And again, here's that website that you can click, and you'll see the registration information there on that main website, along with all the pertinent docs, as well as any addendum and videos that we've posted. So with that, that'll conclude our session for today. So thank you again, everyone, for joining. Thank you, Josh, so much for going over the valuable information for AHFC, Mandy for joining us as well. And I think that concludes it. Thank you so much.
I am going to be closing out the recording. Please make sure to email jose@austinedc.org. Andrea, I will work to get a contact information for the housing department, and we'll be able to distribute that to all people. Thanks so much for joining, everybody. We really appreciate it.
Thank you.